Well, welcome to this episode of the Good Leadership Podcast. I'm your host, Charles Good. Our guest for this episode is Tatiana Kolovou, who is an award-winning teaching professor in the Department of Management and Entrepreneurship at the Kelley School of Business at Indiana University. She has also reached over 10 million learners in multiple courses through her online platform. In this episode, we explore essential aspects of effective communication, providing practical advice and proven methods to succeed in any situation. These elements are crucial for all interactions, from addressing a crowd to chatting with a colleague. We also share techniques to enhance the impact and the memorability of your messages, drawing from years of experience guiding professionals toward communication excellence. I hope you enjoy. Welcome to the Good Leadership Podcast, where we engage with esteemed thought leaders and explore research-backed strategies and techniques that empower leaders at every level to achieve meaningful results that drive lasting change. Welcome to the program, Tatiana.
It's a pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me, Charles.
One of the biggest parts of leadership effectiveness that I've seen in my time in the industry is around communication, and great leaders are great communicators, and you really have a great model for that. And it starts with the 4 building blocks of communication. So I'd like to go through each one. Those 4 are the people, the message, the context, and the listening. Love to save listening for last and dive into that a little bit deeper. But let's first talk about the people, because when deciding what and how to communicate with another person, you got to focus on the individual, and you have a great model and approach, that think, feel, and do model, that will help with this part of the communication foundation.
For sure, Charles. We always, first thing is think of who our audience is, whether it's we're doing a seminar, one-on-one, giving feedback, receiving feedback, just even a conversation that relates to a message or an email. Who is the audience and what's in it for them, so that they will respond or they will hear us out. We have to tailor our message. We have to adapt it so they can be better receivers of the message. They can decode what it is that we're telling them. So by thinking of people, by thinking and feeling how they feel, being empathetic and actually acting is the best way. I always say is, don't deliver a message in the way that you want to receive a message. Always be thinking of tailoring to your audience. And people that are more flexible, leaders that have the ability to shift, code switch in a way, you may say, to lead and reach their audiences, are the ones that are more effective. They don't have a one size fits all.
That's such a great approach, because many people aren't that deliberate when they are communicating. Is, what do you want people to think? What do you want them to feel? What do you want them to do? I think a lot of it gets stopped right at the thinking part, right? The feeling part, the emotions, especially the call to actions at the end, often get missed.
Yeah. And sometimes we have to lead with that. If I know what I want someone to do differently, at the end of our conversation, I may pepper that in my introduction, even with my lead in of what I help them envision what something could be from what it is now. And so maybe the person is a very linear thinker and they want to just jump into action. But you talked about feeling, and we change and we create change and we create trust by our gut, not by our mental modeling of thinking something through. It's how someone approaches us. It's that level of trust that we create, that warmness that we bring, that level of connection. And we want people to feel comfortable with us as leaders and to trust us and to follow us. So we have to find that right mix of the thinking, feeling, and doing, instead of just, so many people where they say, here's what needs to be done. Well, hold on a second. Why are we doing this? And what's in it for people involved? And if we jump some of these steps, we lose the connection.
You're absolutely right. And the next building block of the foundational pieces is the message, and what gets transmitted between the sender and the receiver. More than just positive intent and more than just the words, it's also the nonverbals. It's the tone of voice. It's the speed of your speech. There's so many other things to consider that I think people also think it's just the message that happens. But there were studies and research, and I know the percentages aren't accurate, but there's a lot of our communication that's nonverbal that people need to realize.
I just finished a course with students that came to Greece, and they worked with students from Greece. and I just finished reading their reflections. And it's so interesting to see how when people live this and they say they know body language is important, but when they did something in public transport and people gave them the evil stare, they knew the words did not need to be communicated. Or when they did something inappropriate or something that was wrong, they started being able to being attuned and reading between the lines. And so much of the communication that we share, especially when we are between a camera is between you and I, we sometimes don't think of all the extras that are influencing how we deliver a message. So maybe the light in the room or the background or the pleasantness that I create or the overall placement of the camera may influence the person receiving a message that may not be as positive. Timing is also critical. Think of the time of the day, the time of the quarter, the time of the week that you deliver a message, and also think of context. Sometimes some conversations are easier to be had even when we go on a walk and we're side by side and we don't have to look at each other in the eye in order to have a harder conversation. So context, timing, messaging channels, all of this. Do we Slack? Do we text? Do we email? Do we call? Do we voice memo or do we send an actual formal request? Our lives are pretty complicated. And back to the first point I made, Charles, is don't think of what's easier for you. Think of what your audience responds best to.
And like you mentioned, that third building block, context, you need to keep that in mind as well, because communication never happens in a vacuum. It's the location, it's the timing. It it depends on where you are in your state, so that really needs to be considered as well, so that you're a more effective communicator. The final building block, which I think I hear this so much, that when people want to become a better communicator, how can I become a better communicator? By what I say, what I'm communicating myself. They never start with listening, but listening perhaps is the most critical one. And in my experience, and I'm not sure if you agree, it's probably the differentiator that takes the average or good communicator to that next level.
Yeah, because communication is not a one-way street. So if you're a good listener, even when you deliver a message, you listen to see how it's going to be received and you respond to that. It becomes a circle and it becomes a pattern where you build trust and you build credibility by how you listen and how you act on what you listen and how that information is received. So it's not just let me think of my exact wording I'm going to use, shoot it out there, and then just walk away and assume that my message has been sent. You see this quite often where leaders may record a message, and that's maybe what the media sees, but hopefully internally they have done a voice memo that's a little bit more personable, or maybe they send a message or they get on a Slack channel and they communicate to their members of their organization before they make something more formal. So there's all these different thinking of people, types of audiences that we have, primary, secondary. We have to think about being deliberate, but at the end of the day, we have to hear out our audiences to see how our message is received and then lather, rinse, repeat.
Well, and you want to get credit for listening. Someone once told me that even though you're listening and you can maybe repeat what they're saying, if the person doesn't feel heard, then you're not going to get credit for it. So it's
Right.
having those nonverbals, those nods, having good eye contact, saying some verbal cues. Uh-huh, great,
True.
right.
Mhm.
Just something that kind of gets them feeling, yes, I feel understood, because that's so critical to start any communication, is making sure the other person feels understood
Sure.
before you want them to understand what you're trying to convey to them.
Or I can say, Charles, I'm not, I want to make sure I understand. Can you give me another example? Or let me make sure I'm following along with you. Or if I give you something and I say, help me, do you want me to give another example? Or does this, how is this sounding to you? Or am I being clear? And then just pause and allow silence to be part of your communication toolkit. Because in a low context culture, I'm getting into cross cultural stuff now, but we tend to over talk. And by not using silence and allowing the other person to process, or we add that pause as sort of a holding spot in a conversation, it just shows that we're being thoughtful versus being rushed.
And it can be uncomfortable. I know it myself when there's pauses, the silence is uncomfortable. But like you said, it's so critical to give that person time to reflect and to make sure that they feel like what you're saying, you've thought about. It's more deliberate in your approach.
Yeah.
And I like what you said before, too, because in certain conversations, the backtrack, clarify, summarize, making sure that you understand where they're coming from, especially if it's a tough conversation or dealing with a difficult person, you want to make sure they feel heard. And that's a great
Yeah.
way to do that.
Back to the silence, I was just writing this in my newsletter on listening in a virtual setting like we are today. I could say, Charles, I need a minute to process this. Can you give me a second? I'm gonna just write a few notes. And I told my readers, just kind of sit there, doodle. I don't know what the heck you want to do and do that. Okay, so what I hear you say, it would be terribly awkward, but as a speaker and a listener, I know silence is awkward. Practice it because it shows that you're being thoughtful. And you can always say, I need a minute to process this. Do you mind? Break eye contact. And again, as a listener on the other end, be patient because it is awkward, but it is effective on both sides.
I've practiced it myself and just counted internally 1 Mississippi, 2 Mississippi, just being more deliberate with it as well. That seems to help me so that I'm not so quick to answer before there's enough silence
Yeah.
or a pause for me to really process it more fully and deeply.
Fascinatingly enough, in this situation, in a verbal setting and with silence, I was reading a research study where for listening, it's more effective for the person. If it's just the two of us and we're having a conversation, I may pin you and minimize myself versus being able to see myself the whole time. It's different if you're in a larger meeting, but if it's one on one with a person, people's productivity and self efficacy are higher when they can see themselves as they're speaking. But as being a listener, when you're seeing yourself listening, because it's less of an active communication state, people feel discouraged if they see their face. So we always suggest that minimize that you really can focus on the person that you're speaking to and you're not looking at yourself. We've all done a lot of that in the last several years, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I've even preferred now to have phone calls or have the video off so you can
Yes.
focus
Yeah.
more on the tone, on the how they articulating certain words. Just really listening makes it
Yeah.
easier when you're not visually focused on any
Yeah.
images.
And you can start by saying, is this a good time to call? I wanted to talk about X. Let me know if we should reschedule. And you're giving the person a name. If you do that, if you go, hello, is this a good time to open the camera? It's much harder for the person to say, well,
And it's a
we live
skill
in
that
my,
you can develop, right, over time,
oh,
as well. And you
goodness.
give 5 skills for better listening. One that I just like to focus on is just to improve your listening, recall the details. And maybe you're not a detail person. Maybe it's not something that's comfortable to you, but you give some great tips into how you can improve this so that you're better at recalling those details and the big picture of any conversation.
Yeah, or being attuned to emotion. I even say watch a movie or a sitcom or something in a language you don't understand, you don't know, and see if you can read emotion, if you can read the room without understanding what is being said. There's so much in communication that is carried, as we said, outside of the words that if you become good at that, if you become a people watcher, you just sit and just watch how people interact and communicate, you can hopefully, and you do need a translator, I would say, because you can make your own assumptions. It would be helpful if you have someone that can communicate that a little, but it's very, very helpful.
When there's plenty of opportunities to practice this, you don't have to wait for a professional setting. They're every day, everywhere. I've even done movies where I haven't had any audio on, so I'm just watching it for the body language, and you can tell so much about their emotions, like what you were saying, just even without any audio as part of that. And
Yeah,
with a different language, you can still hear speech tones, right? You can
yeah.
pitch how
Or
fast they're talking, which conveys emotion as well. And details and big picture stuff, if you practice it and make it a more deliberate practice every day or each week, you had mentioned listen to the weather report and see if you can recall daily temperatures for the week.
Can,
Attend a lecture and describe the key ideas presented. It takes deliberate practice, but these are skills that will improve your listening that you can do and get better at. It's not something that you're born with.
absolutely. And the highest and most challenging level is empathetic listening. And that needs sort of a leveled up type of communication in order to do that. You can't do that high level of listening too many times every day. If you know that it's a tough conversation, that you need to present yourself in this way, maybe you can go ahead and schedule it at a time that's easier for you. Make sure you're prepared. Again, that's at a higher listening level, it's higher impact listening. And you don't want to dismiss it or start taking notes. Now, tell me again how you're feeling. I'm writing this down. That's probably not what you want to be coming across as doing.
Absolutely. Well, let's move now into how to get your message to stick, because this
Mhm.
is a common question I get from many leaders. They say all these great things, and yet nothing is getting through, nothing's sticking, nothing is being remembered by their colleagues and moving forward with. And you give some powerful tools that will help that are common tools. Some might be
Sure.
somewhat new, but I'd like to go through those and just kind of unpack each one. And the first one is alliteration. Why should we use that, and how can that be effective to getting our message to stick?
It's memorable in how we use it and how we share it. Alliteration could be from this to this, any political speech that you hear, or any memorable Oscar speech, it's from this to this and from this to this. And usually it's planned, it's prepared. Only Warren Buffett is the one that can sort of roll these things off his tongue. I don't know how he does it. He's been doing it for many years. But if you don't use some of those language tools, it's not as sticky. But beyond any of the tools, I do want to say there's a reason newsletters or newspapers have headlines, or even now you get something in your inbox that's a clickbait. Clickbait is a headline that's supposed to catch your attention. You don't want to speak in clickbait, but if you catch the CEO of your company and he says, "How's the project going?" you don't want to say it's good, or everything's fine. You may want to say something that's attention getting and that gets the person to remember you for what it is that you said. So everything that you work on, you need to be thinking of having a headline around.
And a headline that really captures their attention, that it makes it about them, the with them, what's in it for them. A
Oh
lot of
yeah.
people lead with features when you should be leading with benefits, and you need to be kind of spoon feeding the facts to them, but get them to care about it first. Because if they don't care about the knowledge gap that they have, then they're not going to want to know how to close it. So I see that a lot with
Absolutely.
articles, with companies. It's kind of the chest pounding. How great are we? We're great. If you work with us, you're going to be great, and just sign on this line and everything's going to be great for you. Well,
Yeah.
they miss the bigger point, right? It's why should they? What problem are you solving for them? And make it more about your audience than about you and trying to
Sure.
push your agenda.
What did they get? Back to bumping up with a executive of your company. Usually I always say, how can I make you look good? What I'm working on is going to skyrocket us because I know that's what your board wants, or whatever it may be. Or if you're hiring a younger generation, knowing that they want development, they want leadership tracks, they want to learn and they want to grow and they want to not stay stagnant in a job. If you are selling those benefits at first, it's probably even more beneficial than what they get as a sign-in bonus or what their salary is, if they know that they will grow and they will develop. So finding out what the value proposition is for everybody is going to help you be a better communicator. But it takes time, as you said.
And getting back to the example that you gave for alliteration, which I love, just to kind of give them an example, our listeners to use, instead of saying someone is positive and hardworking, say that they're eager, enthusiastic, and efficient. That's using alliteration
Three
effectively,
E's, right?
making
Mhm.
it definitely more memorable for them. The other thing that I see a lot of is that when people become experts, they speak more abstractly. But
Mm.
novices, beginners need concrete examples. Concrete examples are more memorable and they coordinate people's actions better. In the 1960s, I remember Boeing, when they first developed the 727, they made it very
Great
concrete.
example.
We just don't want to
Mhm.
make the best airplane in the world. We want to make the best airplane that will fly from New York to Miami, land on this short runway in LaGuardia, and have this number of people.
People.
So
Yep.
putting that in concrete language is so much more powerful and effective for people to act upon.
Vivid examples, or saying, I do this. For example, for instance, let me, explain any of these. You can describe something in your, I work with a lot of scientists, a lot of finance people, a lot of experts, cybersecurity, what it may be in all the groups. They can describe, this is what I do. So for example, if you have this problem, this is what it solves. So it's okay. Sometimes people think I have to describe my title of what it is that I cover because I have to gain credibility in the eyes of the listener. But if that, for example, or just imagine is another magical word that you can say. Imagine that you have this problem and you're running into this challenge. What our product does is this. Now you're bringing it down to that level where everyone can understand that. And using those bridging words are just so simple, but you have to even keep a notebook and keep writing down some of those things that you can go back to and use and reuse.
Absolutely. The next one really is very effective, and a lot of people use it, but I think they could use it even more, because when you want to teach someone, as you know, an instructor at Indiana University, teaching them new material, you want to connect it to what they already know. And analogies and metaphors are excellent ways to do that, to bridge that gap from their prior knowledge and trying to hook it into that so it's more memorable and to be used probably more effectively.
When I was explaining cross-cultural differences, high context, sort of focusing more on big level messages and more of nonverbals and behind the scenes communication versus low context, everything is explicit and specific. I remember explaining this to students and saying, low context is Twitter, high context is Instagram. Immediately, right? One is more visual and emotional. The other one is, it is what it is. The words are short, sharp, and to the point. They got it immediately, but I wouldn't use that example with, say, a group of 50 to 60-year-olds. I better use it, or at the time I was using it with a group of 19 to 20-year-olds, and they received it. I need to keep sharp in my mind of thinking, what do they understand? Probably I would change my example now that TikTok has hit the landscape as well, but we always have to be on our toes and being able to communicate something in the language that our audience hears.
The next one, which I want to include before we move on, is chiasmus, and that's a unique one, but I know it's possibly a personal favorite of yours. So explain to us what that is and how it can be effectively used.
So chiasmus is not something that again, Warren Buffett uses a lot of chiasmus, or antithesis, you may say. Chiasmus is a Greek word. And Winston Churchill said, heroes don't fight like Greeks. Greeks fight like heroes. So you have to use famous ones that you can use. There's many, John F. K. and others have used strong chiasmus, but you may think in yourself, it's not where this in, you flip it in this as well. It's not how much money we can make, it's how much we can make with less money. You can adapt a chiasmus to your specific example versus using a famous one, and you can make that stick or make the audience understand it a lot better. Again, chiasmus needs a little homework, Charles, and it's not something. Do you use any ones that you have as your favorite ones?
Well, the one from Warren Buffett is the one that I'm familiar with, and it's far better to buy a wonderful company at a fair price than a fair company at a wonderful price, right? So like you said, if you can find those common ones, those popular ones, those that have been used, then you can usually work it in certain situations. It's hard to come up with one of your own.
Yeah, for sure. But they're memorable. And that's where sometimes if you're writing something, or if you're writing an email, you can look something up and use that as a bridge to get you to the message that you want to say.
Are there any other things before we move on to our next topic that you want to say about getting your message to stick?
Yeah, I think hitting the headline quite often I have, and later today, I'm going to ask a group of members in a workshop to say, bring your idea down to 6 words. If you can condense something, if you can take a 30-minute presentation and bring it down to 30 seconds, and you can chop it down and build it up, you absolutely know the essence of it. but narrowing something, saying less is more. If you have that discipline and ability to narrow something down, it does get people's attention. And in today's world, Charles, as you know, we tend to consume in bite-size information. We don't have as much of the time and concentration to focus. So to close, when you want your message to stick, it needs to be concise, it needs to be witty, it needs to be tight, and you pause, and then the person wants to have a little more. Also,
Someone
vivid examples, language, colorful examples, and words that maybe are not as used as often, that you may use depending on who your audience is.
Great advice. Someone once told me, be brief, be brilliant, be gone. And
Be
that could be
gone.
used for
Yeah.
communication as well. Thank you so much, Tatiana, for joining me today on the podcast. Remind our listeners how they can get in contact with you and learn more about your work.
They can follow me on LinkedIn. I have several different courses on LinkedIn Learning that I have been able to produce in many different languages with lots of learners, and they can watch some of those there. I have a newsletter called Stronger that comes out once per month, and it always shares ideas and strategies on how to level up communication and how to be a better communicator in general. So I hope that's helpful.
I hope this episode has provided you with valuable insights. If it has, I ask you to share it with someone who would also benefit from it. If you've been enjoying and gaining knowledge from this podcast, then subscribe to our YouTube channel where you can find all the previous episodes of the podcast and additional learning resources. You can also subscribe to the podcast on Apple or Spotify and leave up to a 5-star review.